We're joined by Craig Stobo, our expert economic and financial commentator. Craig, welcome to the show again. Great to see you, mate.
Thank you.
Listen, you've obviously got a huge background yourself, so if we can put that hat on for a moment, in the wind farm and renewable energy sector. Your comment upon the decision of these principals to turn down the Southland wind farm project and where to next. Got any thoughts?
Yeah, yeah. I'm at the Downstream Energy Conference, as it happens, 2 days in Christchurch, so it's pretty topical. The theme coming through is a structural energy deficit that we face as a country with abundant natural resources, potential access to more oil and gas that we can get cranking. But the way we organise ourselves to get to a point where we're going to run out of gas in 8 years' time, and we're going to rely on Huntly as a multi-fuel support for renewables is a terrible position for us to be in. So I'm sure the Minister of Energy, I didn't hear Shane Jones' comments, but they'll be furious that Wyndham's been turned down, as are other projects possibly under threat of not going ahead. I understand the environmental concerns around wetlands, around bogs, frogs, bats, but what the EPA has is a veto, and I'm not sure that's the right way to get these projects across the line. I know the current government, with their Go for Growth slogan, wants to rebalance the tension between the environment and economic needs of our people for electricity and to ensure we've got increasing supply of power. Otherwise, we face higher and higher prices for electricity. So it's very disappointing to see this. I'm even surprised that there's no mitigant in place to ensure that those animals or those bogs aren't interfered with. It just seems a blanket response that doesn't take into account possibilities for mitigation. Anyway, we'll probably have more of these where the EPA will say no, and they're obviously batting in their corner. But we need someone over the top that can balance the arguments between adverse environmental factors and the positive economic benefits. But these guys have got a veto. I think that's inappropriate.
Yeah, listen, the other thing that strikes me, you've raised the Environmental Protection Authority. They are responsible for appointing the expert consenting panels, and they would have appointed the three people, Claire Lenihan, Kaikoura Kaitiaki, Gina Solomon, and Sharon McGarry, to hear this particular issue. Now, they would have appointed all those people, I'm presuming, prior to the election of a new government. So they will have had a certain flavour that I imagine would have permeated their appointment in the first place, wouldn't they, of the kind of people they're likely to get to act on these panels?
Well, I guess you look at the terms of reference for what's required by effectively are planning commissioners. So they need to know planning law, they need to know environmental law, need to have an understanding of economics, I would have thought. So I don't know the process, Michael, under which they're appointed, how long they're appointed for, but it seems to me a veto over economic growth is inappropriate.
Yes, Contact has said that they are going to appeal the decision, but they're also warning that it could be years in the process. Shane Jones mentioned till 2035, even if they were successful under the current process. Is this a good argument, do you think, for the government? And the other thing that struck me, Craig, was this was a consent under the COVID-19 Recovery Fast Track Act. So this was the previous government's. This government's brought in a new fast track process. Does the government need to say, well, anything that fails under the COVID-19 process can be resubmitted under the new act?
Well, you're required from memory to apply for the new coalition fast track consent process towards the end of last year, or it may have been middle of last year. So there was a long list of projects put up.
Yeah, that's right.
And then ministers, advisors went through and chose several. I mean, not all of them are energy projects. There were all sorts of different projects, and some energy projects did not get up. And I don't think Wyndham got into that list from the new RMA process.
Well, I guess that's
There
because it
are
was already
other
under this one, then, Craig. It would have been already,
correct,
the process
correct,
would have started already. Yeah. Yeah.
correct.
Yeah.
But you can understand shareholders and directors' dismay at the process. If that is the case, that it's pushed out again until 2030 plus, you wonder about the pipeline that's sitting on Transpower's list of potential renewable energy projects that are still waiting for consents. You just cannot grow production fast enough. So reliance on coal and gas as our transition fuels is going to remain a very important part of our future for a long time to come.
Yeah, well, I see somebody else has just pointed out, and thank you for doing so, whoever that was, but Waiuku Wind Farm was also declined fast-track consent by the EPA commissioners as well. So this would suggest on the basis of Southland and Waiuku, and also I think Sharon McGarry was on the group that got rid of the Mackenzie Basin solar farm proposal too. You're talking about that veto, Craig. That there is if you like, an institutional view that renewable energy projects, if they threaten anything, are a bad thing.
Well, that's what the EPA outcome seems to infer, and you need a counterbalancing argument, which is the economic argument around power prices and production availability and investment. And you cannot attract debt and equity capital to New Zealand at a major investment conference last week, saying bring in your capability to finance our growth, and we have a local setting that makes it very difficult for projects to get up and running. It's just too hard.
So what do you need to do? Disestablish the EPA or take away from them this responsibility and give it to...
I just think there's a balance in here around the environmental arguments, mitigations against those arguments, and the powerful nature of economic growth arguments, and a decision that's to be made over the top. So you get the two arguments, then someone else decides. At the moment, it's a veto, and that's just inappropriate. Got to change the way the system works.
So who would you have in charge of making these decisions?
Well, either you depower the EPA to an advisory group, and the same with the company putting out the proposal provides economic advice. It then goes to a third party, and the arguments are put in, and the third party decides. I think that's a better way of trying to get the debate going, rather than having a veto position by an environmental agency.
Originally,
we've got to change the way we make these decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, originally, though, the fast track approvals bill, if you remember right, had a concert of ministers giving the final approval.
Yes.
People didn't like that, and instead gave it to a whole series of unelected people who then essentially saying, no, I'm not sure that system's improved from what was being originally proposed. Do you?
Yeah, no, you're right. I think Shane Jones, Chris Bishop tried to have a fast track version of the old RMA, but as pressure built, they wound it back to not too dissimilar variation of what we had before. Local authorities, iwi, commissioners, and the minister. Like, it's all the lobby groups are still in there, but at the moment, as you can see from the decision, the EPA still has a veto, and I'm not sure whether that's been watered down in the new arrangements that Chris Bishop's envisaging with the project list that went up late last year.
Okay, problematic. Okay, the GDP figures have come out. You would have had a look at them, Craig. 0.7% growth in the December quarter. I was making note of the fact that there were some, I think the construction sector did very badly, so did mines. Their activity was down an awful lot in that quarter. What does that tell us about the New Zealand economy? And I know it's looking backward 3 months, but what does it tell us about the state of the economy on the basis of today's figures?
Yeah, so plus 0.7, you're right, for the December quarter, following two negative quarters. So we had a technical recession, but on an annual basis, it's still minus 0.5 over the 12 months. So it's still bumping along on the bottom. I think the RBNZ did say in their forecasts late last year, they were thinking that December quarter might be a turning point. But in terms of the industries, construction, media, transport, telecoms were down, and the sectors that did quite well were real estate, restaurants, and transport, possibly related to tourism, Michael. That a bit more tourism in the December quarter sort of helped those industries. So it's you now sort of turn to the future rather than looking at December quarter. And there was a very telling reduction in consumer confidence by the Westpac McDermott Miller survey, down 8 points to the lows not seen, if you exclude lockdowns, not seen since 1991. So consumer confidence has taken a hammering, and I think that's the uncertainty in the global environment and what that means for New Zealand. So that will hurt. That will mean people's hands will stay in their pockets, and you'll see that come through in the retail trade numbers, I'm sure. The other stat that was important was electricity consumption by the industrial sector in the December quarter fell 9%, and that's because Methanex and Tiwai were shoveling their electricity onto other parties with the demand response techniques that were used. They're not actually operating to full capacity as industries. They're just toll booths to provide power to Meridian, Contact, and other users of the power, including the Crown. So, it's still an environment, I think, where we're going to be bumping along the bottom. There's still very, very good signs from dairy. You would have seen Fonterra confirming an increase in the dividend payout and still sticking at $10 as their midpoint for the payout. So that's really encouraging. So that's still bright.
Well, just on that, I mean, isn't it interesting? I've always argued that the two things that all the greenies hate the most, which are tourism and dairy, are the reasons that New Zealand has an economy in the first place, but always lead the way to economic recovery when we're in trouble. Here we are. It's the dairy sector, Craig, again leading New Zealand, or at least keeping New Zealand's head above water.
Yeah, and highly productive. And white gold, we're using our comparative advantage, which is rainfall and grass, that no one else has got such efficient farming as we have. So, fantastic. So let's just hope they can continue to thrive, and that tourists who come here from North America with a very cheap exchange rate from their perspective, for example, enjoy the country and enjoy the experiences here, and tell their mates to come out and see New Zealand. So that's good news. I agree.